All right. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited about the talk, Making the Most of Jupiter in the Natal Chart. Um, Jupiter is near and dear to me. And when I first started going through the planets in this series, I was taking the time to really go over some of what people consider the more malefics, the planets that I feel can be a bit misunderstood and get a bad rep sometimes. And whenever I chose Jupiter for the next talk, I just felt a real lightness of the topic that just felt like a nice, just a really nice thing to get to spend some time on talking about some more exciting areas of astrology. I think people, Jupiter represents luck. And so it just feels really good to spend some time talking about this. So let's just get on with it, making the most of Jupiter in the chart. I like the little presence bell ring right when I said that. So Jupiter, it's connected to Sagittarius. It's the archetype and covers the planet Jupiter, the sign Sagittarius, and also the ninth house. It's a fire sign. It's mutable. And I just put this little graph up to show, take a minute to talk about what that means, that it's mutable. You have the signs go into 4 different quadrants. So you can see house 1 through 3. In that area of expression, it's more focused on awareness of self. So the soul is really developing that sense of self, just just presence. The signs 4 through 7, the planets 4 through 7 represent integration of self with the environment. So that's at one point the soul recognizes that it's part of an environment and gets to interact with that and engage it with who it is in context. And then with each of these 4 quadrants, the first sign in each quadrant starts with the cardinal sign, which means that it's a new impulse. It's a new area of exploration for the soul. The second one is fixed, and so it goes from an energy of newness to an energy of being fixed on having a more fixed nature, on having landed in this newer impulse, and kind of having more attachments to how it's defined itself within this impulse. And then when you get to the third sign in the quadrant, then it's cardinal. It's kind of overcome that more fixed nature, and it's gone back into more of an open mindset, you could say, more of an open energy, with being able to be a little bit more flexible in how it understands itself in this context, which paves the way for the next expression. So you have that happening through awareness of self, integration of self with environment. And then the third quadrant is you start to move out into the world. It's less self-focused. Third is awareness of others. And Sagittarius is the final stage of that quadrant. So it's it's a mutable sign. It has a more open and inviting energy when it comes to exploring new ideas and new thoughts, which of course paves the way for it to move into the 4th quadrant, which is about integration of self with society. And that's more of mastery. So at that point, that seeking has really shifted into really landing in your expression of self and how you express that in the world. So that's just feels like a relevant thought on mutable that I wanted to share, because it does hold a really special place in the quadrant, has that kind of open energy to it. And while we're talking about introducing Jupiter, it feels really appropriate to start just by acknowledging that scientists now believe, and of course anything that scientists say should preface with to the best of what they believe at this time, to the best of their knowledge, believe that Jupiter rains diamonds. What more can you say to introduce a planet that embodies abundance? I just think that's a pretty special thing to consider, that Jupiter would be able to hold that level of abundance and also manifestation. Jupiter is about manifestation and that energy where you can just really make things come to you. And so the idea that diamonds would literally fall from the sky, I think is, it says a lot. So now the glyph of Jupiter, it's all of the different glyphs, the different pieces of them symbolize different things. When you have the half circle that you see in Jupiter and any of the glyphs, the half circle represents the soul, and the cross represents matter. The full circle is spirit. And so seeing how those three different elements, their presence and then the way they interact with each other will also tell you a lot about a planet. So the glyph of Jupiter, you see the crescent is being held above the cross. So and maybe I didn't pick the best picture to represent this. This one has it a little bit more squished together. But you see that the crescent representing the soul, the cross is matter, and Jupiter is symbolized by the soul rising above matter. And so also note that with Jupiter, the soul is on top. It's above matter. With Saturn, that's actually flipped. You see that the matter is above the soul in that sense, in that case. Let's see here. So Jupiter is the guru. It's the Buddha. And it's known as the guru in Vedic astrology. Don't worry, I'm not leaving behind EA. It's a perfect embodiment of Jupiter, no matter from what discipline you're looking at it. It just makes sense. So it's the perspective that allows things to come to you easily and without effort, the manifester. But of course, there are two sides to this coin. On the one side, you see the big picture, and you don't get lost in the details or in minutia or the mind trap of overthinking it. You just see it laid out, infinite, before you on the ever-expanding horizon, and know it as truth and trust it to provide. You quote, luck into all that you need, and you expand into this horizon. Jupiter is expansion. It's the part of the universe that just provides, and that innate knowledge of what that bigger thing is that's providing for you. So Jupiter in Sagittarius is the mastery of soul over matter. And I want to also preface this talk too by saying that I'm going to be using Jupiter and Sagittarius interchangeably, talking about the same archetype. So on the other side of this coin, you see some of the shadow potential. Your trust in all being provided can make you lazy. You lose discernment, and expansion can even manifest in being overweight. Your vision of the bigger picture means you forget to see the trees and only see the forest. Not getting hung up on the details feels like liberation, but it can become a way of checking out or spiritual bypassing. So that thing that you've been drawn to accomplish, if it requires effort and you don't just, quote, luck into it, you say, well, I'll get it in the next lifetime, because you're tuned into a bigger timeline. And this is the shadow of Jupiter. And when I say that I'll get it in the next lifetime, I mean, I'm talking about myself. This is something that I catch myself saying often, and Jupiter is a strong presence in my chart. So that's something that I've had to watch for sure. So Jupiter can be likened to a sugar daddy. He often gives you what you're asking for, but he's not the disciplinarian who offers tough love and gives based on what you need. That's Saturn. Another shadow to look out for with Sagittarius is lying, which stems from both laziness, white lies that make your life easier, and from exaggeration, making something bigger or bloating the facts, which is that kind of that expansive, impulsive energy that being applied in a not helpful way. So there are variations on this theme, of course, and we can further break down what's at play here. That truth on the ever-expanding horizon that Jupiter is aimed at is divine natural order. When you're tuned into divine natural order, everything makes sense and everything has its place. It's the organizing and harmonizing principle of nature, seen through patterns and fractals, as within, so without, as above, so below. And that's why Sagittarius is nature and natural law. When you tune into the fractals and can see the patterns that shape our world, you can follow those fractals forwards and backwards to see the thread of connectivity woven throughout all things. You can follow those patterns in order to perceive of things beyond the immediately obvious, as well as what might be to come, as a prophet does. And you can see your place within this order. It's easier to have trust in what's at play and feel secure in your place within the bigger picture when you are tuned into natural order. So security can lead to complacency. So that's something that can become a problem with this. When you take it for granted, it's kind of use it or lose it. So if you're not actively looking, not actively discerning, you can let your guard down. One who's perceiving the patterns when applied to our human histories and experiences can see that safeguards and discernments have their place. When we're distracted by day-to-day life and not living this truth, it's easy to fall out of harmony with this divine order, lose the thread, and ultimately allow this divine truth to be supplanted by cultural and karmic beliefs. When we forget our place in this order, it's easy to feel lost or afraid. When we feel that loss inside and desire truth and a sense of place, we may turn to religion. And I want to say too, I do a lot of reading in my talks. I just write everything out ahead of time because something that I find is when I sit down to write notes about what I want to say, everything just spills out until it's done. And then I have my talk. And so it feels like the most encapsulative way to offer this information is just how it comes through in the moment and being able to catch that as it does. And it's exciting for me because I kind of get to find out at the same time that I'm writing. Sometimes it'll come out and I'll say, oh, well, that's cool. I didn't know that. So I just like having that channel open and then catching it all and then giving it to you guys. So turning to religion. So all religions originate in love and offer a path to recovering one's own access to divine truth within. But as the understandings of these original teachings fade over time, religion can become practiced by way of going through the motions, often devoid of its original meaning. So when our sense of true place is severed, it's easy to be fearful and to feel lost. Those who seek power and see religion as an opportunity to supplant a person's sense of personal truth and connection to natural order without a false order can capitalize on this fear and this need to belong in order to get its followers to behave in a controlled way. The desire for order and truth coupled with the desire to belong can be so strong that a person will give their power over to it and cling to and defend what they believe is truth and source of safety. And notice in that sense, I gave a lowercase t. So they will cling to the source of safety, lest their sense of meaning be shattered, and then henceforth dogma is born. And to clarify that point, not all forms of power seeking and control mechanisms in religion come from a conscious choice to wield power over others. The steering of religion in that direction can happen gradually as the ego, through loss of connection to higher truth, feels lost and threatened and craves control over its environment in order to feel safe. The world must feel predictable and explainable. That stems from the classification tendencies of Sagittarius's polarity sign, Gemini, and is born from the mind, not from higher knowing. And feel free, if anybody has any questions at any point, to go ahead and chime in. So religion is one way that a person might look for their place in the larger order. But also born of this seeking is philosophy and both inner and outer journeying, as a person follows the impulse to realign themselves with higher truths. We can look to other signs and planets in the chart to find ways to support our experiences of Jupiter, as there are some built-in dynamics by natural aspect to Sagittarius. And I'll take a quick pause to see if anybody has anything they want to share at this point, or any questions. All right, going on. So across from Sagittarius is the Gemini Mercury archetype. So Sagittarius's polarity, Gemini, helps to balance the tendency to forget about the details and reminds us that the fractaline nature of divine order includes the smaller details that we see reflected in the larger concepts, and that there is use in this. If you wish to be able to convey or teach the meanings of larger concepts to another, for example, it's helpful to be able to break it down for them. Mercury's glyph is the circle, just spirit, acting as the bridge between matter, the cross, and the soul, the crescent. So spirit rests in between matter and soul, making a bridge. Mercury supports our ability to turn Jupiter's knowledge into a communicable form. It uses the mind as a bridge to make the information into a relevant translation, translating it to the listener. Our culture often confuses wisdom with coming from the mind, though true knowledge is not arrived at by the mind. The mind is an administrator and works off of relativity. The mind relies on what is already known and compares new concepts to its current beliefs, and so it has its clear limitations. Highest truth is not relative, but for the ego to understand and grow, there must be something in it for it to relate to. This is why we have myths to convey complex archetypal concepts. And I'm not suggesting that Gemini represents the ego, but when you're tuned into things that feel larger and bigger than a human experience, and you'd like to talk to humans about it, you're going to need to be able to translate for humans, and not a lot of people have completely moved beyond having egos, and so you have to be able to connect with people where they're at. Gemini is represented by two, the twins. It is one thing in contrast or relative to another. We communicate concepts to a listener by meeting them where they are at, so relative to the listener. Now Virgo with Mercury is the natural square to Sagittarius. It is notable that while Mercury rules Gemini, it also rules Virgo, which squares both of these signs, and Mercury is expressed differently in Virgo. The glyph of Mercury, still applying here, means that matter is translated to the soul through spirit, but in this case through an alchemical refinement. So Mercury is filling a slightly different function, using the same means. So while Jupiter is considered to be in its detriment in the sign of Virgo, there's actually a lot of potentially positive influence that Sagittarius can receive from this naturally squaring sign. For one, Sagittarius is very expanded and open to the infinite nature of spirit, while Virgo tends toward contraction and refinement. This refinement can feel like a burden as barriers to Sagittarius's abundant nature. Also associated with Virgo is judgment. And judgment closes the mind and the generous accepting nature that Sagittarius must exhibit for its ultimate fulfillment. But judgment is not actually Virgo's nature, but rather is a shadow expression for when Virgo is out of alignment. The authentic aligned Virgo expresses discernment, which is much different and is the exact medicine that Sagittarius needs. Sagittarius asks, "What is my higher truth?" And Virgo asks, "Now how do I apply this in my day-to-day life in order to refine my offerings in the world and not bypass what is my work to be done in this lifetime, my true service to this world and those in it? Having been informed by my higher truth and having been informed by natural order, how do we apply this?" So Virgo takes that expanded truth and distills it into medicine. So the nature of squares is that they challenge the sign it's squaring, holding it to account. So while squares can feel challenging, and the squares that we have in our chart, and when there are squares naturally occurring at various times in the sky, we can feel a little bit stressed out about that because our usual, the way that we like to express a sign can be challenged, but that's not a bad thing. And we can squares often account for our greatest ability to grow and to mature. Challenge can be helpful. So the other square to Sagittarius is Pisces and Neptune. So the glyph of Neptune is the soul above matter, facing upward and away from matter, open. Neptune in Pisces is the opposite of boundaries, even to the point of lacking discernment. It holds all things indiscriminately. Neptune reminds Jupiter to remain in a state of expansion. It tells Jupiter that no matter what level of understanding you have arrived at, don't get stuck there. Keep going. All truths are only truths until the next one comes along, which each truth paving the way to the next. Pisces challenges dogma. And I just wanted to check in with everybody at this point. Does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Okay. It can feel kind of weird doing these talks sometimes, just talking at the screen for a while, but I know you're there. So I'm offering my chart for you guys, and this is something that when I decided on this topic for the chart, for the talk, Spirit really lit up in excitement for me to get a chance to take this hard look at this aspect and dynamic in my chart, and to create space to sit down and do some writing about it, because I find that I actually learn a lot through writing. As I said, the process of putting it on the page actually allows things to flow through. It's like it bypasses my mind. And so I got to learn a lot about myself through this. So Jupiter, is the ruler of my chart, because my ascendant is in Sagittarius. And Jupiter is in a stellium with my Sun, Saturn, and Mercury conjunct the midheaven in Virgo. Virgo considered its, quote, detriment. And that detriment just means a sign that the astrologers have deemed the planet to be unhappy in, that's not the most ideal combination. I say that, I acknowledge that here, that's something that there's a consensus on. At the same time, I tend to not see negatives in astrology. I tend to see various degrees of resistance. And that's something that is felt on an individual level. And so whilst it might feel easier sometimes to have a planet expressed in a different way, that doesn't always mean that it's better. And so the level of ease and alignment that you have with something, I absolutely believe is equal to the level of resistance or the level of surrender that you are in with that dynamic. So Jupiter is on my midheaven, conjunct the Sun, and it creates a constant driving focus, obsession even, on expansion toward higher meaning and truth. This is further emphasized by their placement within the 9th house, which is the area of life associated with the Sagittarius Jupiter archetype. So the placement of Saturn within the stellium brings in a strong sense of duty and a need for discipline and honor in the quest for truth and how to apply it in life. And that can feel a bit intense, almost. I do feel that Saturn in a very oppressive way. It does feel like my dad, but I love it just like I love my dad. So Jupiter with Sun in the midheaven are also involved in my karmic axis. So if you notice, I have a lot within 18, 20, 22 degrees. a lot happening pulled into that karmic axis for me. And for those of you that are still learning about evolutionary astrology, the karmic axis is looking at Pluto for one. Pluto is where your soul is currently in its evolutionary process, what themes it's working on, what themes it's bringing into this lifetime that has amassed a lot of energy behind and is still trying to push through. So Pluto, anything that connects to Pluto by aspect is in your karmic axis. And then also looking at the nodes of the moon. And so in my nodes, you can see are in the 3rd and 9th house. And so continuing with the energy of the Sagittarius pulling in the 9th house. And anything that's connected to the nodes of the moon, the north, or also your karmic axis, the north node is where your soul's going. That those themes that it's working on through Pluto are meant to be integrated into your life to work for you, for your dharma. And the north node is your dharma work, and it's what's uncomfortable because it's not quite as familiar. The south node is what's very familiar. It's what you've been doing for a lot of lifetimes, similar to Pluto, but the south node isn't necessarily something that you're trying to evolve or work through. It's just you've been there, done that. Unless you have squares to your nodes, then it brings in that energy of something coming out of your past that is still continuing to challenge you. These planets are still challenging you to integrate and continue to look at something that you haven't quite moved on from yet. So just an update for those who are coming to us, learning evolutionary astrology, that's an important piece. So you can see that Jupiter is highly connected in the chart to many planets of mine, as well as the larger timeline, because it's connected to my karmic axis. So it's connected to my larger timeline, storyline, and karmic thread. All of this being tied to Jupiter, Sun, and midheaven, all being in Virgo, creates an underlining theme of, yes, but what is this for? Because that is the tendencies of Virgo. Virgo represents refinement, it represents tools, and it wants to have something tangible that it can use as a tool, something that it can hold. So Jupiter on the midheaven ruling the ascendant creates something of an open channel for information for me. Information being on the midheaven, it feels like it almost streams from above, present and forefront of my experiences. Yet Virgo questions this channel and creates restrictions and buffers, creates buffers to what comes through. A lot of second guessing. I don't do that so much anymore, but that was a big theme for me to push through, a huge piece of Virgo's influence that I had to work really hard to integrate. So Virgo says, please just give me as much as I can integrate at this time and show me how I can make it useful toward my life and place in it to my service. This is a positive way that this is expressed. So helping me to turn this information into tools that I can use to live a life of equality and a life of quality and integrity, and to be a better support for those around me. But Virgo out of alignment creates an uncomfortable amount of tension, being tied to my karmic axis. This tension is strong for me. It causes overthinking at times, resistance to doing the work of applying myself in the world and true service because of a fixation on getting it right. And this is also Saturn's influence here. But true to Virgo's shadow nature is this idea of I have to perfect it before I offer it. So that creates a lot of tension. So it causes overthinking, resistance to doing the work of applying myself out in the world in true service because of a fixation on getting it right, and the need to get it perfect first. And to this, add to this, Chiron and aspect in the 6th house. 6th house also being the house of Virgo by archetype, that they're archetypally connected. So in the 6th house, I have Chiron squaring my nodes, and you can understand that there is a hearty amount of wounding in the area of service. 6th house Virgo is service, namely martyrdom, and the tension is understandable. So Chiron, you know, known as the wounded healer, it's an area where you have a lot to offer, but there's a lot to really heal on the way to being able to offer that. And so when you have something squaring the nodes, the solution is to integrate it into one node or the other. And the way that you know which way to integrate it is if you were to stand on the circle, and in this case, Chiron is on this side, then you look at whatever node is to the left of it. And so my Chiron integrates into my south node, which is in Mercury, or sorry, in Gemini. So on the note of Chiron squaring the nodes, it helps to see that Chiron is integrated through the south node, which is in the 3rd house in Aquarius. Communicating from my most authentic self while in service rather than an idealized idea of myself or what I imagine is a socially acceptable version that won't be shunned for what I think or say is a critical step in me using my voice to teach, to write, and to express my offerings as they are received through this channel to spirit, through my Jupiter and its placement. So my chart is a good example of how Jupiter is really at play in all of these dynamics. So many dynamics in my chart tied to these soul karmas. And there you have Jupiter really trying to get stuff done for me, but there's a whole lot of integration to do. So this need for authenticity is further highlighted through the ruler of my south node, which is Uranus, who happens to also square the nodes, and opposing Chiron, obviously. So it squares my nodes in the sign of Scorpio. The work that I do to speak up, to teach, despite my fear of persecution and rejection, is meant to transform me and to heal my karmas, to lift me up in my individuated truth. And I say individuated truth because Uranus is that individuation. This Uranus is resolved through the North Node in Leo in the 9th house. If I do the work to transform, I have the capacity to lead, 9th house, Leo, and I have the capacity to bring truth to others. Being the 9th house is connected to that Sagittarius archetype. So another noteworthy planet, checking the time, planet in aspect to Jupiter is Neptune, in loose conjunction to my ascendant in the 1st house in Sagittarius. Neptune squares my Jupiter, and so it challenges me to surrender, which can be hard for a Virgo who wants to know what her proper place is. But Pisces says it's infinite, forget place. Being connected to the ascendant and in the 1st house, Neptune is also felt as a constant and immediate influence and factors into this tension with the Virgo tendencies. Neptune says, expand and stop looking for the use in everything. Let go of ideas of usefulness and practicality and perfection. Neptune says, forgive all those mistakes that Virgo fixates on. Don't just lose the discernment, or just don't lose the discernment and you'll be okay. Neptune in Sagittarius is also a signature that connotates psychic abilities, as it's a journey through the infinite. So journey, Sagittarius, Jupiter is journeying, and Neptune being the infinite, also representing what you would say is the unseen realms. It's also the dream time. So Neptune also represents dreams, and connected to Sagittarius opens the doors to dream time journey work and prophetic dreams. So that gives me an additional use for that connection to the more of the divine nature. You could say that divine order, being able to tune into that in order to glean information, to be able to understand the language, I guess, that spirit speaks with. That Neptune in Sagittarius in the 1st house, anything in your 1st house is really present for you. That is a very active planet. And so it kind of creates an openness. And then Sagittarius gives that openness something to do. Does anybody have, I'm going to go back so you're not tempted to read on Carolina. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts at this time? And I want to make sure that that all makes sense, how so much of all of these karmic things all tie into understanding how to maximize and get to unlocking and realizing the full potential of Jupiter in my chart. Because it's important to me that the point of the talk is to see how to get the most out of the planet. And so having brought in all of these other elements, you can see the pathway for really bringing that energy of Jupiter forward. And so I just wanted to make sure if there are any questions and if all of that makes sense.
Melanie,
yes.
your Jupiter is ruled by Mercury in Libra in
yes.
the 10th. Just wondering, how does that play out for you?
Got it. So Mercury, yeah, it's also part of another stellium, and it is connected to that. The Saturn is connected to the Capricorn archetype being in the 10th house, and it's in Libra. So for me, there's a strong feeling, again, getting that whole intensity around wanting to get it right and wanting it to be useful for people, wanting to make sure that what I'm saying is fair and that my perspective is balanced. So that's bringing in that Libra energy. It feels like that energy of Saturn feels really controlling in conjunction with my Mercury, that whenever I go to speak, when I open my mouth, if I have to get past this tension in the throat before I just allow what I'm saying to come through and trust that I can access that truth when it comes to speaking. While it's inside, everything feels really yummy and right and good. But as soon as I go to speak it, I can feel all of that pressure and tension of that 10th house and Saturn and Virgo, the Saturn in Virgo. You better get it right. If you're going to speak this to others, being Libra, being in the sign of Libra, I better make sure that what I'm saying is going to be of benefit and to the highest good. And again, too, honoring that Libra is connected to beauty. Beauty is very much connected to divine order too. The way that Sagittarius is connected to divine order and natural law. Libra represents the archetype of natural order and divine law orchestrating itself into something that is in harmony and in balance and that is pleasing to look at. And when you look at something beautiful, it helps you to really see that there is an order at work in the world and putting things together in a pleasing way. And so for me to take the time to speak, it's really, I don't know at this point that I would be able to just sit and riff on this information without putting it all together first into a package that I feel good about. So that's definitely a huge influence that Mercury has on me, wanting it to be beautiful, wanting it to be fair, and honoring how it impacts others. Does that answer your question, Linda?
Yes, thank you. I can also see that in terms of final dispositorship, I don't know if it's the actual final dispositorship pattern, but so your Mercury is connected to Venus and then that's connected to the Sun and it just goes around and around. How do you feel about that?
It does go around and around and around. And then Venus being in my 8th house, you can see in Leo, you can see that further emphasizes that this is an area that I do have resistance and tension around. It's in the 8th house because it really wants for me to transform it and transmute this impulse. And while being attached to it being fair and beautiful is nice and refinement is lovely, for me to actually step up and to be able to offer what I have to offer in a leadership role, I need to trust in my worth and do that work of evolving my relationship to Venus. And so, and then of course you see Venus is squaring Mars in Scorpio, again, 8th house, and then also squaring Scorpio. and the 11th house is just the themes run rampant through my chart. I could be having a talk probably about any planet and be discussing the exact same thing every time once you start to really connect them all together.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're welcome. And so I'm excited to move on to Carolina's chart. And I was really happy that right after acknowledging that there's psychic connections between Sagittarius and Neptune, when you have those energies linked together, be it Neptune and Sagittarius or Jupiter and Pisces, then you see that's a marker for having more of a psychic connection. And whenever I was asking Carolina about her experience of things in the chart, and I was asking her questions, she alluded to some things that hinted to me that this same connection, the same signature she has in her chart, is a great opportunity to delve into that a lot deeper. So keeping that relevant. And Carolina, true to nature, true to form, I just wrote a bunch of stuff down. Interrupt me at any time, but I'm just going to get through some reading with pauses, and we'll leave time to talk about stuff, and I want to hear from you. But also just chime in, at any point. I'm always happy to pause what I'm saying. So if it's okay, I asked nature it was okay with you, but I quoted what you told me here just to kind of set it up, that you had said, I've always shied away from religion. My parents never enforced their religious views on me. Not that they're religious. I had always been more scientific about things until life, just started to not make sense. Or when I began to, quote, see that there's more to it than what we've been told. And my search for higher meaning has been with me since day one. I've always questioned things, always. I must seek the truth. And that generally feeds my curiosity about all things occult. And for those listening on, what she's saying connects that Jupiter being in the 9th house in the sign of Scorpio. So Jupiter is in its natural house, and the 9th house is connected to the area of life that holds the same archetype. And so that connection to seeking and to truth is really strong. And it's with, and being in Scorpio brings in those wanting that sense of wanting to unlock the mysteries and that connection to the occult. And it's also just transformation. In general, Scorpio rules state changes. And so a lot of times the occult has to do with that transformation and with state changes. The idea of brewing potion in a pot, even if you look at just even the most classic idea of what it looks like to do magic. All magic is all about transforming things. So she says, as far as I can remember, I've been drawn to ancient cultures and their practices. Anything that was considered weird or taboo was a favorite topic of mine and still is. Me too. And for support/insight, I would love assistance in managing that opposition between Saturn and Jupiter and what that's really about. The anxiety that it causes me is no fun, and I'd like to run free with my Jupiter. Bless you. Of course you do. So here I just started spitting a bunch of stuff on the page. So Jupiter conjunct Neptune, trining Pluto in Ceres. So understanding too how this is all connecting to your karmic access. There is an orientation toward understanding and seeking balance in nature and balance of dark and light. And I say that because Pluto is in your 7th house. And, Libra is already about balance. But I also noted that it's next to Ceres. And Ceres is connected to nature. It has the connection to the goddess Demeter. And she plays a huge part in nature. And this feels really nicely synced up with the part of Jupiter that's connected to divine natural order. and natural law, and playing with those natural laws in order to, say, concoct the potions. So somebody who's works with maybe herbs, who's interested in witchcraft, this is very fitting. And I also said a balancing of the dark and light, because that's just what Ceres told me in this case. If you remember the story of Persephone, she was had to live 6 months out of the year underground in the underworld, and then 6 months a year above ground. And Persephone is Demeter's daughter. And it's during the times of the year when Persephone is pulled underground that Demeter mourns and brings in the winter, the fall and winter, and the darker days come. And so, and then when her daughter returns and she's in a good mood again, and she lets the sun return. So it's all about this, having this balance of dark and light. And being in Libra, that felt significant to me. That stood out to me as being in close conjunction with Pluto as a relevant part of the story of your chart, especially because when we're talking about Jupiter and Sagittarius, that's already working with the laws of nature. So Jupiter is at later degrees of Scorpio. So the themes of seeking through occult and wanting to know the deeper transcendental meanings of things and not shying away from the dark has been well developed through many lifetimes, especially considering Jupiter and Neptune conjunction, both being retrograde. This brings in past life elements. So a retrograde planet is expressed in a way that is that pulls in elements from prior lifetimes. You could say it's felt in a kind of a different way. And so, especially having both of those together in retrograde next to each other, they're really bringing in some big energies together. And being at the later degrees also shows that there's a lot of development has happened in that area. So this brings in past life elements, as well as being in later degrees, showing it's been highly developed. This is why you are attracted to ancient traditions, because your experience with them are ancient. It's home to you. The ability to seek through these areas is natural and familiar. Neptune, also being in Sagittarius, holds the psychic markers. You also say you have felt this innate sense of truth your whole life. You may not be aware of the full strength and power of this compass. A way to engage and open this lies in moving on from what is written about the occult through books and the accountings of others, and to expand and open beyond these boundaries. Neptune's bringing in that openness and expanding beyond whatever boundaries of current knowledge happen to be around the occult. So you have access to a ton of knowledge and exploring your own past experiences and knowledge gained through lifetimes on a soul level. There's a lot to be liberated in this. And before I move on to more pages of writing, I wanted to check in with you about that, because I haven't had a conversation with you about what your experience is of the occult, or how that really presents for you in your life, if you have more of a visceral kind of personal experience with those elements. So whatever about that you feel comfortable with sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
Past experiences, knowledge, and that I already have. I don't know. I've always felt like I just know things, and I don't know if that's the conjunction of my Uranus and Moon. But I just do. I just feel like I know things, and I know them well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've taken advantage of diving deep into this vast well of knowledge that I could go into. That would be pretty wild. I mean, I feel like some of this has come about through my own exploration of plant medicine, and my experiences with those, and feeling in connection with spirit, and conversations with others, and that have passed. That's how I've received those gifts.
Got it. So that part of you that just knows things, that's what I'm talking about. So that Jupiter, Neptune, there aren't really boundaries and constrictions when it comes to the kinds of information you have access to from your prior lifetimes. But it's the psychic ability The way that I experience it is actually claircognizance. And so it's not this, like what we think of, and it can be hard to realize you have that because it can happen as an aha moment. Sorry, kitty. So it's like this aha moment where all of a sudden you just know something, but you don't know how you know it. Or you don't know why you know it, but just like,
Right.
oh,
yeah,
okay, that's that then. That's what that is, you know, or something that you hadn't considered, all of a sudden you just know, like you know the whole time. So it's less of, it's not, doesn't always happen as a conversation. Sometimes it's just a spontaneous remembering of something that your cells just remember. It's just in you, you know, and so trusting that can open up a whole lot. And that can grow on itself the more that you play with leaning into that. But like I said, that is something that you've kind of learned most everything that you need to learn from exploring those things. It's just a matter of figuring out what you already know or remembering what you already know.
right.
So however, this work should be done consciously and carefully with the use of protective stones or talismans, and calling in higher guides and guardians to assist in accessing only what is for the highest. So you're saying that Saturn gives you trouble and creates intention. And Saturn is, in some ways, kind of keeping you in your place until you're ready, in a way. And so I'll go on to explain. So Saturn opposing is doing a couple of things here. It demands discipline and integrity in this work. The past experiences of ritual, coupled with the comfort in going to the deepest, darkest corners of the occult, has taken you through experiences with darker energies and darker rituals, which isn't to say that you've done naughty things, but just that a soul can actually really deepen the amount of presence that it can hold here in a body on this planet, by going really deep into some uncomfortable areas. And so through ritual and all of your accumulative experience, you've experienced some stuff. So there exist practices and people who know how to work with these darker energies, but often at a cost. It seems there is some struggle and resistance for this reason, as Saturn is showing up in your past, coupled with Jupiter in Scorpio, and further represented by Pluto ruling it. As there having been funny phrasing, but having been an element of control and possibly fear in the use of these abilities and energies, I think in this case, it's not necessarily that Saturn is bringing in fear, but trying to create more of a sense of resistance sometimes that fear can hold, and Saturn represents fear. But there are some energies here that kind of need to get wrapped up in a careful way. So this lifetime is about integration of these things, learned and open to be accessed, just with prejudice. As you are doing this work, also include work in soul retrieval with a person who is trained and skilled in navigating these realms safely, as it will mean encountering darker spirits who will be trying to hold on to whatever parts of you they have claimed in your work together. Saturn is also in late degrees of Gemini. The knowledge you have gleaned from these experiences are yours to claim, and you have earned it. Your soul and your inner compass just have an awareness of the need to tread through these realms with protection and intention and authority. So Saturn is authority.
So Saturn, Melanie, so Saturn is on early degree of Gemini.
Yeah, but it's aspecting it, you know. It's in opposition to it. So while it's in early degrees of Gemini, what we're looking here is all the cumulative knowledge and experience that you have gained through that Jupiter. But Saturn is opposing it, kind of creating safeguards. It's been keeping you from really fully accessing your potential so far. Waiting for you to, I think, honestly, just learn more about how to use that Saturn when you're taking steps into working in those realms more consciously. Saturn is there really wanting to be a protector. It wants you to do it in a careful and methodical way. Saturn is wanting you to be really disciplined in your approach when you go in there, to take it seriously. Saturn can have kind of a severe energy, so it's bringing awareness to the need to tread lightly. But also Saturn is authority, and your Saturn is in Gemini too, in the third house. And so there's the information that you have, like you have the information, but the most important thing is taking ownership and authority over what you know, so that when you're doing the work to I guess re-access some of those energies that you've worked with, not letting any negative types of energies, negative types of beings, you could say, have any kind of a sway over you, that you can go in there with your elbows out and really claim your space. Because if you do that work and you are timid in any way, you could be taken advantage of. So that's probably what's been keeping you from acting so far in your own capacity. But as you continue to open and branch out into your own, taking your own path back into those energies and reclaiming what you know, reaccessing all of that wealth of knowledge and information that you've gleaned from lifetimes of doing this work, it's really important that you bring that authority with you and that you bring some controls with you. So having, like I said, like stones, some kind of object that you could even ritualistically give an object power to hold a certain purpose for you. And you could invite, benevolent beings to work with you to give an object a certain kind of protective power, and then use that in your work. So that's bringing that sense of ritual in and really claiming and owning your ability to protect yourself and to stay safe doing that work. And I notice I'm going just a little over time, but there's so I can move into some of the wrap up here. I think this is okay. All right. So 2 slides. So remember, it's all about balancing and integrating the light and dark. The shadow work has been for this purpose. And just a moment. So the shadow work has been for this purpose. And this lifetime, you're set up to integrate this work. Doing so and having had experience traversing these realms, you're set up to be the light bearer for others. So like I said, when a soul really develops a strong footing, going even into darker and scarier places, that gives them a capacity, an even greater capacity for light. They can hold light in their body, in this world, doing this work to an even greater degree. So doing so and having had experience traversing these realms, you are set up to be the light bearer for others. Vesta is sextiling Jupiter in Aquarius in the 11th house. Vesta is the light bearer, is like a keeper of the light. There's the Vesta connects to the myth of the Vestal virgins. The virgins whose job it was to protect the sacred light in a temple that was designed to hold this sacred light that was never meant to go out. And these women they walked a path of maintaining absolute purity. That's why they were the virgins. And that was their one job, just to keep and hold this light. It's a pure job. And so Vesta showing up in aspect of Jupiter in the 11th house in Aquarius, bringing in some insight into what it is that you can do with this light. You are a trailblazer, and this is a gift for your community and your sphere of influence. And the 11th house is your tribe. It's your sphere of influence. It's your community. So North Node in the 11th house, North Node being your soul's purpose, your dharma. So in the 11th, Aquarius is conjunct Mars. In the 11th, your North Node is in Aquarius conjunct Mars. So again, 11th being your community, your tribe. So your fire, the fire, Mars being that fire, as well as the Vestal version, that Vesta. Your fire and desire to trailblaze is a gift having been developed through prior lifetimes. Mars also having that trailblazing energy. It's the impulse to strike out to new frontiers brazenly. So there is a fearlessness, but this also sits in contrast and challenge by Saturn, who is checking that impulse and making sure you don't bypass important considerations. So Saturn makes you slow down, and Saturn is time. It's a little bit. Has that denser energy. It forces you to slow down, which can be frustrating. Mm-hmm. But it tempers that. So the need for authenticity is also represented in the North Node, Aquarius, and individuation of yourself from the teachings as they're currently written. The teachings meaning what's currently known and out there based on the occult, and the things that you've researched. Mm-hmm. So you have your own insight you can distill and new ideas or understandings to present. Bringing your own perspective into your sphere of influence as a trailblazer who paves the way for others is your dharma. A lot of the first half of your life has been to catch back up on the topic and to create a framework for spirit or your oversoul to communicate to you from. Your oversoul being the sum collective of everything that you already know, that you get those insights from. So however, you're not tied to that framework. You are a pioneer, so use it, but don't give it too much power. Meaning use that framework. What I find is that while I learn in a very direct way, spirit also guides me to read things and to learn up on things so that I can develop a better language for receiving. It can use things to reach me with other messages that I might not have had a context for understanding. And so even if I don't read a book and come away from saying, oh, this now gets to be my ultimate truth, reading that book gave me a whole new language that spirit can draw from and build off of, that my higher self can build off of to help me re-access what I already know. It's hard to pull things out of thin air when you don't really even have words for it. And so having that framework is helpful, but it's kind of like the saying, you have to learn the rules before you break them. So that can kind of apply here. It's like you learn all of this stuff and that's awesome. And Saturn is doing that for you too. Saturn has been there opposing that Jupiter saying, yes, but look at all there is to learn, because that's what Gemini is. It's just, it's the details. It's going through and learning all the details. But now Jupiter is like, and with Pisces, Neptune there too, with your Jupiter together, they're saying, all right, cool, you learned all that, now forget it. And let's open, because there's so much more. There's so much more. And the expansive energy of Neptune coupled with Jupiter is really great, because it keeps it keeps the horizon moving forward and continuing to expand. Something that has been incredibly important for me to learn is that that Virgo tendency of overthinking things and wanting to say, yes, but sure, I'm receiving this, but I know this can't be the whole truth, because who am I and what do I know? I can't receive the whole truth. And Spirit slapped me in the face enough times and said, accept this truth. And then that paves the way for the next truth. And then you just grow into more and more truths. And it could be that something that I was forced to accept as truth could have been 6 truths back and I don't relate to it anymore, but it was a really important step. And so it keeps that horizon expanding, and it allows that trust and being able to land in what is showing up fully and without attaching. So it's an open channel. It's, you receive something, but as soon as you grasp for it, you're clogging the space up. So you receive it and let it go. Receive it, let it go. And just by being able to be in that place of surrender, it can come faster. And more can come, and more truth, and more truth, and more truth, and then onward. And that insatiable thirst for truth, and that insatiable pushing forward for what's next. Neptune is helping to create just a beautiful pathway with Jupiter for that to just keep going. There's no end.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just head out of this screen share here. and see if anyone has any questions before I let you all go, because I know I've kept you on a little bit above, especially if you have any questions, Carolina.
That was really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot to think about. I definitely feel the expansive more, and then settling that, and then coming back to more knowledge. I feel that a lot. And the Saturn definitely is okay, have you considered these things? But I feel like it's more of like keeping me stuck there. But now I understand its purpose.
Yeah. Pacing.
Yeah.
Because that whole expansive Jupiter Neptune together, it's so expansive, and it could feel almost like there's no filters. Everything feels possible.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to walk with that, sometimes it can be helpful to parse it out some, or to turn it into steps, even though, again, not getting stuck in being linear, because that's not really ultimately linear, isn't the most natural way to experience these things. But Saturn is time, and Saturn is linearity. And so it's going to sometimes show up for you. It doesn't always have to be that stopper. You know, it doesn't always have to be, you don't always have to stumble over that in your path, and you can expand and you can keep going. But sometimes you're going to see Saturn showing up. And when you do, you're going to learn to feel that instinct to check yourself and to check in with what's happening, and learn to invite that and greet that as a support for you. Mm-hmm. And it can sometimes it doesn't have to be saying more than just take a minute, take a few breaths, and check in with yourself.
Right.
You know, it can just be a pause. But when you feel that tug, you know, when it doesn't feel like this huge resistance or this big hook that's dragging you back, and it's just like, it can just be a pause too. You know, it can be easy too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie, and thank you very much, Carolina. That was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for hosting. I really appreciate you so much and all you do.
Thank you, honey. Okay, we'll catch you next time.
Yep.
Okay, bye.
Bye.